how many of you in here, and I'm going to need to see you for just a second, feel like you are pretty well versed in the ethical implications of mobile health? Okay, how many of you think that the IRB is very well versed? Okay, so we have some work to do. As for me, my research and funding is listed on this slide. I've had federal funding, industry funding, foundation funding, and my work has primarily over the past 20 years focused on developing research literacy, primarily focusing on community-based participatory research and community members who are playing a bigger role in the design, conduct, and reporting of research. I've been doing that for about 20 years now, and now we're taking some of that curriculum and migrating it so that it's more useful for citizen scientists. So that's one area of research that I've spent quite a bit of my career developing. The other is doing research on research ethics, and over the past 6 years, I've really, directed much of my work on what's called mobile health or digital health research. And so I'm going to be talking more about the second part of it. I work at the Qualcomm Institute at UC San Diego, and this is a building, many of you have been there. It's a really amazing, diverse part of our campus that brings together people from engineering, the arts, the humanities, medicine, and we all seem to be somewhere in this building, and it creates amazing opportunities for collaboration. I am affiliated with the Center for Wireless and Population Health Systems that Dr. Eric Heckler directs, and I'm also affiliated faculty with the Design Lab that's also within the Qualcomm Institute. Recently, we received some funding to open up the Recode Health Center. It's a very new center. Recode stands for Research Center for Optimal Digital Ethics. I'm going to be talking about the core platform, the educational initiative, which falls under the BRIC programs, and some of the tools that we've been developing as a result of learning from people like you about some of the issues that you're having, some of the decision-making challenges that you've had in deciding how to select an app or a device, how to use it, things that you need to think about. So most of you, when you think, if you've ever thought about ethical, legal, and social implications, the acronym is ELSI. It's very much connected with genetics research. That's where it's been used, that's where its home is, that's where funding for ethics has been within the NIH. And for the most part, all of the research has focused on ethics around the human genome. But for those of you in here who are behavioral scientists, you're thinking more about how do behaviors and how does our environment influence health behaviors? And because of the way technologies have evolved over the past decade, we're seeing so many more opportunities to learn about human health from platforms like Facebook, from Twitter. We're looking at electronic health records now. We can look at the environment and influences of the environment by sensors that are placed on our public transportation. So there's so many more opportunities to learn about human health. And I borrowed this slide from Kevin Patrick, and many of us in the Center for Wireless and Population Health Systems use this because it really shows how many determinants of health we can capture from our everyday life. And sensors are one way where we can capture 24/7 things that people are doing. So tools used to capture personal health data are pervasive and ubiquitous. These are the type of tools that are being used in our everyday research studies that are becoming much more popular. So the visual methods, and I think we have at least one person who has a camera, wearing a camera. Anybody in this room wearing a camera right now? I saw one. So wearable cameras are being used to study how people behave in their free living environment. It allows us to use visual methods to see what people see. It's a first person's perspective. Sensing methods are sensors. This is an example of a sensor that Todd Coleman in our bioengineering department developed. And this sensor picks up temperature, it picks up ECG, it powers itself, through a wireless power coil. And this sensor, which is about the size of a postage stamp, can be covered with a tattoo that looks like a pirate or something really cool to make it look less like a sensor and more like something like a tattoo. It can be used to transmit physiological data directly to a clinician. It can also be used to transmit remotely physiological data to a researcher. So anybody have any ideas what could possibly go wrong if you're transmitting physiological data to someone? What did you say? Yeah, right. And you know what's so interesting about this? If it's used in the clinical care, HIPAA can cover it. When it's used in behavioral research, there's no electronic health record involved. There's no HIPAA covering that kind of data that's being transmitted into a research record. So it's out there. Social media methods. A lot of the digital epidemiologists are using different kinds of publicly accessible, or even, the company will share data with researchers. And the digital epidemiologists that are capturing these data are basically telling IRBs what they need to be thinking about and doing when it comes to protecting this kind of information. These new methods create new types of data. So the wearable camera, you can see the first person's perspective. In this picture with the salad, you can see what that person's eating. You can compare it to what a person says they're eating from a 3-day dietary recall. And in this picture, the person that gave me this was one of the researchers that started using the SenseCam and how I got into digital health research ethics. She would have taken the hands out of this picture before I showed it on this slide, because she figures that this is identifiable data, and she was so concerned about being overly protective of anything that I showed. And I probably should replace that with the one that doesn't have hands in it. But in reality, this is one bit of information that you can see what that person's home looks like. If that person happened to have a child from their home in front of them, you would see the child. That child probably didn't consent to participate in this study that this person is in. If it happened to be the workplace or the clinic or the bathroom in the mirror when that person's getting ready for work and maybe doesn't have all their clothes on. There's a lot of different things that can happen when you're wearing a camera. So this is just one example of a picture. The GPS tracking, this is like 5 years ago that we pulled these pictures. You can see where somebody is going, coming and going. You can see this is Southern California. This is somebody going back and forth over the border. You can make some inferences about that. All of the GPS traces are time-stamped, so you can actually plot a person at a location. And if something happens at that location, these data could be discoverable. So what was interesting for me is when we looked to see what IRBs were looking at and thinking about when it came to GPS data, there was nothing in the protocol determination letter. So IRBs read the protocol, they have their thoughts, they write them down, they send them back to the investigator. Not one concern about the collection of GPS data. Investigators were saying, yep, we're going to put it in the locked filing cabinet, only these people will have access. Well, that doesn't work with GPS data. It's so granular and there's so much of it, you really have to think about how you're going to protect that data because it's incredibly sensitive. But at the point in time that this was being done, nobody was thinking about that. Smartphone data, social media data, you can make a lot of inferences about relationships. So anyway, point is, we have a lot of different kinds of data that we're starting to look at and think about. When we started to do this research, it was before Fitbit started. I mean, Fitbit was December of 2013 when it first came out. We started this work before then. So all of these commercial products then get put out on the market. Researchers start using these devices and tools as part of their research. What was interesting to me, coming from both a deep knowledge of the regulations as well as knowing how these tools were being used in research, there's a huge conflict between terms and conditions of use and federal regulations for human research protection. In fact, Fitabase has a listing of all the studies that they're supporting that use Fitbit, And I'm curious about whether the IRBs know that Fitbit's terms and conditions directly conflict with federal regulations. So the NIH's study, the Precision Medicine Initiative, All of Us Research Program, has a pilot study that was approved 2 summers ago to give 10,000 Fitbits to people enrolled in the All of Us Research Program. That study still is not approved by the IRB at this point in time because of Fitbit's terms and conditions. And the IRB for the All of Us Research Program recognized that it conflicts, and either the NIH takes full responsibility for anything that can go wrong, or they're not going to be using Fitbit. Interestingly, Fitbit won't change their terms and conditions. So I think this is going to be an interesting push, pull, tension, whatever we want to call it, to see how we move forward under federally regulated research. So the characteristics of digital health research are really different than what we've known from our traditional research. We can now monitor and or intervene with people 24/7 on the fly in real time. When we started this, the research was primarily happening in academic institutions by traditional academics, but now the industry, tech industry is involved, startup companies are involved, not-for-profits, and as you heard from Dana this morning, citizens are very much involved in conducting research using digital tools. So the entire landscape is changing. We can now know everything at a granular level using digital technologies. We cannot promise anonymity any longer. And not everyone's regulated. So as Dana was talking about, she doesn't have a regulatory body. She wants to do work that could be considered research. She doesn't have the same training that many of us have. So we have people in this ecosystem that are trained and not trained, regulated and not regulated, and some socialization around ethics, and some have no socialization around ethics. And so these are areas that as you start working with different entities or people affiliated with different entities, there are different things that we need to be thinking about. This slide comes from SBM from several years ago, and this is basically how I got involved in doing this work: ethics in the digital age and when the IRB says no. So this is Brittany. She's a research assistant in Jacqueline Kerr's lab. Jacqueline had probably 3 different NIH studies to do observational research using wearable sensors. She wanted to learn whether or not accelerometers and GPS could help identify whether or not a person was moving. Could we use these tools in lieu of self-report? Could we use these tools in lieu of somebody coming to a lab? So it was really truly observational research, and the IRB said no. And she had these 3 studies waiting to get approved so she could do this work. I suggested to her, why don't you start doing research and try to figure out what the risks are? And she said, I'm an exercise physiologist, I'm a psychologist, I don't do ethics research. I don't even know how to ask the questions. And so that's how we got involved in starting to do research. So we wanted to think about how do we, if the IRB is not the go-to, if we can't expect that they will know how to think through this new type of research, how might we engage people in thinking about how to shape ethical practices moving forward? And so we kind of organized buckets of stakeholders, and we had the tool makers at the time who were making the tools, and now the tool makers are biomedical research entities, so it's changed. So, Google has now Verily, which is a major health research organization. We have participants who are still participants. We have researchers who are, like I said, not just academic researchers, but researchers broadly speaking. And we have the IRBs that are really trying their best to assess risks and benefits. So this is kind of the group that we wanted to work with. We were able to get funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to focus on the research community and the IRB community. And I'll tell you more about what we did with that. But what we did to begin with is we started doing research on mobile health research. So we analyzed IRB determination letters. We did focus groups with IRB members to find out how they thought about risks and benefits. What did they need to help support their decision making? We asked participants what they expected, and like our prior speaker, we asked people from underserved populations what they thought about wearing different kinds of sensors. What would they be worried about? We asked Latina women, we asked Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, we asked Somali refugees, and we found out that they have differences in what they're worried about. They have differences in how they want their privacy protected and data. We wanted to look at terms and conditions to see whether or not terms and conditions were always going to conflict with our federal regulations or only sometimes. What we learned from just the few that we looked at was that if you are enrolling adolescents in your studies and they need to adopt a certain type of technology, that those terms and conditions that are written for 12th grade plus need to be condensed and changed considerably if they're going to be used for young adults. And then we looked at the NIH reporter, and we've done, just to kind of get a sense of how much of this research is happening, how much funding, who's funding it, what kind, is it all social media or is it wearable tech? And so we published that about a year and a half ago in Nature Digital Medicine. But we've been doing more in this space. But what we found out is that under the ethical, or in the ethical bucket, we have to really think about informed consent. And can we really be informed? You think about the participants, do they have adequate research literacy? And I'm going to argue that pretty much no. They don't know what a systematic investigation is. They get confused about clinical care versus research. There is this lot of literature on therapeutic misconception. Depending on who asks them to be in a study, they're going to think that they might be getting treated. Even if they can tell you about placebo and experimental, they think that they're going to get the right treatment. So there's a problem with research literacy. We have cultural diversity. We have people don't understand their data. So especially how much data is just flying out of a phone all the time. So those are really important aspects of just knowledge it's going to affect how people are able to be consented to participate in research. We have bystanders who get picked up if I'm wearing a camera that's pointing at you. I may have agreed to wear this device and be in a study, but did you? You happen to be part of the research record and you didn't consent, but technically you aren't a research participant because the question isn't about you, it's about me. So I can choose to be in the study, I can choose to wear this. You don't have as many choices. Now, if I go into your home, I might ask you, is it okay if I wear this thing because it's going to be taking pictures of your house? And you'll say, no, I don't think so. But there aren't any set guidelines for bystanders at this point. And then risks and benefits, it's really a different kind of domain. What are the risks? How do we assess them? How do they vary by person? Now we move into this legal regulatory bucket. OHRP is the Office of Human Research Protection. They just updated the common rule. The updated common rule that has been going on for 6 years or so took effect. They don't even understand what these digital tools are that we're talking about here. When they said that they wanted to have any research that reports information back to the participant to go directly to full review, the behavioral scientists, we had a conversation with them at the Qualcomm Institute. What about if we're using a tool where the intervention is to give people feedback in real time about their behaviors, because that's the intervention, and we're trying to change their behavior, but it's about their steps. It's about, did they meditate? It's things that are not about, do we observe a tumor in a place that we didn't expected to see a tumor? So they had no concept of this kind of research. So these new federal regulations really were blind to the kind of work that we're talking about here. Getting to the societal aspect of it, there are so many things that we don't know. There are what we call unknown unknowns. And we won't know those things until we try them out. And we have to be able to find safe places where we can share information that we're learning so that the community learns from us, and that we are able to, think through what are people expecting in terms of privacy. How do they want their data shared or managed? I mean, these are really new questions that we need to think about. So we've been doing this research, we've been publishing this research. Here are just a couple of articles, headlines that we've put out, and I have a link to this here. And you can also go to our Recode website where we keep all of our publications current. But I'm asking everyone to be thinking about who's going to be the next Theranos, because we really need to be thinking about the claims that these new companies are putting out about what they can do. There are no guidelines and no guardrails in some parts of our ecosystem. Spin-off companies can pitch something to organizations, and that organization may adopt it. We have people at UCSD Health who are approached by vendors selling apps at the rate of 300 a week, saying, oh, this is going to improve Epic in this way, and this is going to do that, but they don't have any evidence. And oftentimes the people making decisions don't know what to ask. And so here we have a lot of just noise going on, but we need to be paying attention to it, because some of this is research driven and some of it isn't, but for the public, they don't know the difference. And so we get pulled in as researchers to anything that happens that's going to get publicity. It's going to be a problem for everybody. So when Ubiome had a problem, that makes anybody that's doing work on the microbiome look like they're doing something wrong. The filters are just not there. I was interviewed for this story a year or so ago. Your computer may know you have Parkinson's, shall it tell you? So this was published in Stanford Magazine and later in Medium. And basically, keystrokes, kinematics, can tell whether or not I have a condition. My voice can tell whether I have a condition. So these are new markers for health that are being captured. Did I download an app that all of a sudden is taking over my keyboard? That's kind of how they're doing this work. So make sure when you download an app and hit I accept that you know what it's doing, because sometimes it may be doing things that you don't know. For those of you that know me, this is something that we created with the help of a community, and it's a resource available to everybody in here. It's called Connected and Open Research Ethics. We got started with RWJ money. We have had other funding since that point in time. This is where we're sharing protocols, we're sharing consent language, we're sharing expertise among the community, and there's close to 800 people globally that are involved in this now, so it's quite a big footprint in this space of trying to help each other within this community do good work. We started to develop tools, and the tools that we were developing were really designed to help researchers think through how to make decisions about the apps that they're creating. And so we published this last month in Translational Behavioral Medicine. We took what was interesting, we did a research approach to developing this tool. So the pyramid on the left is what a psychiatrist had developed to help psychiatrists decide whether or not to recommend an app for their patients, and just wanted to think through how do we help a clinician use an app that's going to be used by a patient and then reduce the risk. So I looked at that and I said, I don't think that would really work for researchers. Let's figure out what might work for researchers. And the first thing I noticed that it didn't have any explicit ethical principles in it. And then I also didn't quite know if it was a pyramid. So we did some focus groups. We asked people in the community what they thought about this. They said, what we really need is a list. We need a checklist. We don't know what this pyramid is, but we need a checklist. So we created a checklist, and we used those domains of ethical principles, privacy, evidence, usability, and interoperability. We asked people to tell us what else should be in here. We came up with a lot of items. We created questions to help people think through how to think through these things. And then we asked a group of behavioral scientists to reflect on the last study that they did that involved the use of digital mHealth strategies. So they had their use case, and they went through our checklist, and they helped us identify, were these the right domains, were these the right questions? And that's what we published in Translational Behavioral Medicine. And what we did was basically, they were saying, well, privacy is about a person, whereas confidentiality is about the data. And so we separated those. Privacy was over here, and confidentiality went over into the data management bucket. And then evidence was different than, we wanted to make it, ended up in the risks and benefits category. So we ended up changing what this looked like, and this framework and checklist is now available on our website. So it gives you examples of what you need to think about, not only in your protocol, but what you need to think about when it comes to informed consent. And this is a work in progress, so the more feedback that we get on this, but people that helped us develop it were very grateful that they had the opportunity to reflect, because they said many things we didn't think about. This was really helpful. We didn't know what we didn't know, and in some cases it kind of prompted some incompetence, feelings of just, I shouldn't be doing this because maybe I just don't know enough to keep people safe. But the more you know, the better you'll be able to do things, because obviously all of these studies were approved by an IRB. The IRB didn't pick up on stuff. And so we're going to start creating a tool for IRBs, which is the next step, and then we'll create tools for participants. But this is revisiting what I introduced at the very beginning. This is the platform that we have. This is the place that we are keeping all of our educational resources. The core platform has resources for you, and not only is it something you can take from, but you can give back. So when you get protocols approved, you can upload them, parts of them, whatever part you're comfortable with, and we can help you with that. So with that, I want to acknowledge there's been just a gob of people from all across the globe who have been helping us develop this, from the UK to Australia, US. We've had IRB members, we've had people in this room, Bonnie and Donna and Eric have been very much involved in this, folks from Sage Bio Networks, researchers, clinicians, legal scholars. It's really been a village that has gotten us to this point, and I'll stop there and take questions. With lights, unless you're falling asleep back there. Yes.
So I've got two questions about some of the ethical challenges we've run into recently.
You're at night.
Yes. So the first one is around what happens post-mortem. What rights do you have post-mortem in terms of, because again, the amount of data we can now collect about you, but a lot of our policies don't extend what happens after you die.
Yeah.
So, do you have any thoughts around that, or are we tackling that space?
Yeah, that's not new. I mean, people die in research studies, and they have ever since they've started. So the thing about the federal regulations is that they cover, research involves human subjects, and a human subject is designed as a living individual about whom you collect information via intervention or interaction. So you're only a human subject if you're alive. Now, if you die and the study continues longitudinally, and you continue to collect a person's information after they've died or use their information, sometimes that goes back to the family, and the family can make decisions. But I don't know the context of the question. So, is that helping?
I can talk to you more about that. We have a number of situations where there's no established policy or procedure for dealing with this. So the other question is, increasingly we're seeing a number of IRBs approving protocols for unrestricted sharing of data. And those are variable in that some explicitly consent to that and some don't. In terms of thinking through the guidance for IRBs, I mean, have you run into this question of unrestricted sharing of everything that's possible to share outside of HIPAA?
I have problems with that. I've done a lot of research on broad consent and layered consent and dynamic consent, and just again going back to the literacy of people understanding what their data are requires education, and it depends on how much education they're getting when they make that decision. And sometimes people say, take anything you want, without knowing what anything you want is. So, I mean, it's going to require money from the NIH to invest in education that is going to increase the ability for participants to make informed choices. The other thing is informed consent has to change dramatically. We've gone into this mode of lots of words on documents to cover your ass, basically, and it's not informative. And I'm working with older adults now. They can't see the words on these papers. They sign because they trust the researcher and they want to be involved with UCSD. And then sometimes they don't show up because they just wanted to sign because they're here at our site, and I don't want to disappoint people, but they can't see those words. And so you think about 12-point font or 14-point font, those people I'm working with can't see that, and they're not going to admit it. So there's so many things wrong with informed consent. I would hope that the NIH would invest money, but I'm kind of an infrastructure advocate, and there's not a lot of support for infrastructure at the NIH. We want, within NIMH, can you just tell us what you want to do with schizophrenia using this really cool tool? And I'm like, everything can go wrong, right? If we're going after the sexy tool, things can go wrong. Don't you want to kind of build the support network you need to make sure that it's secure, that we've thought through the standards of sharing anyway, it's like I can't find the right voice at NIH. So maybe you're at tag.
So here's a thought experiment, Camille. So that is the relativism of privacy. So at MIT, we tend to see privacy as absolute. And you're familiar with that MIT PISA experiment? Mm-hmm. So the economists actually asked students, what they thought about privacy, and it was all absolute. And then they incentivized them by giving them a PISA if they surrendered some emails and details on their friends, and almost everybody surrendered them. So my point is, people claim something about privacy and how beautiful they are, and yet on the other hand,
it's what is the paradox? Privacy paradox.
That's exactly. So like Amazon probably knows everything about my buying habit or more. And the other, and I'm curious. So your comment on that. The other one is when you say privacy from a patient's point. We don't want to be connected to the world, then we essentially become invisible in a world where everything is connected and there are benefits. So.
Yeah, I saw the sign outside in the patio. Maybe you saw it because I was sitting at breakfast and it said private event. I'm like, I can see everybody there. What's so private about that? It's like I can see you. I think how we use that word is really interesting. We did a study with younger people and what their privacy ideology was versus the older adults that I'm working with. And younger people are much more likely to trade privacy and to get something. Sometimes it's a $5 discount on Dobbs toilet paper. It's like, oh, really? You're going to give away all that for toilet paper? And that gets me to thinking they don't know what they're giving. I do think they care, but the older adults are so much less likely to trade privacy for something. So we're looking at the fundamentalism, pragmatism, and then what we got to with the older adults is how do the computer scientists learn more about how the older adults are thinking when they're building technology? so that it's more suited for their preferences and they're more likely to adopt. So it's not only teaching older adults about technology, it's teaching technologists about older adults. And privacy is really different generationally. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, you did, yeah, I'm just trying to, I'm still trying to process
Yeah.
these issues. The second, and maybe more from a helping me, because one of the ways we are doing, and I'm employing it in a study, is trying to do technical, competency, meaning stratify people based upon questions they answer about how they use a cell phone into people less technologically able and more technologically able. Is there any work being done? Because the people less technologically savvy may also not be very aware of the nuances of the data. So have you done any, is any
I'm
work being
starting
done?
to do some work on this, and again, it's really focusing on older adults, because what we learned is that they want to use new technologies, but they are fearful. They don't quite know how to do it without their grandkids helping them. They use the word, "I'm worried about getting hoodwinked." And then that's when we learned about their privacy preferences and that they want control. One of the things that I thought was interesting, it was like, and we're doing this right now, if they wanted to use technology, maybe they would go to Google and search for apps for older adults. And we looked to see what they would get if they did that. And it was really weird, because the things that show up first are companies like retirement communities that are paying to have their stuff show up first. And they're creating this illusion that they have done research on what apps are best for this person. There's no evidence behind what's showing up in Google. And then sometimes they use really big font that makes it look like it was tailored for them. So there's just stuff going on that is just not nice, that's my simple way of saying it. It's like they're potentially victims of commercial entities that want to make money off of them. So I think we really need to be thoughtful about technology and privacy and capacity understanding. What they are telling us is we really want to know what we're getting into. How can you educate us so that we're better consumers? And that's our first step, is telling them when you go searching for an app, these are the kind of things you need to be asking yourself before you download. Some of them say they're free, but then you find out you need a subscription. You can download Netflix as an example, but then you have to pay for it. So I mean, just how they're advertising is something that I think we need to be paying attention to.
So one last, so the tools that you have created in terms is available to all the scholars and beyond. This I find a useful common good project, because you will be dealing with IRBs and they will ask the same inane questions because they don't know how to stratify, wellness studies from interventions. And this is a wonderful site with best practices, and I've used some of your IRB templates to simplify my own language. So I'm just
But I'm going to qualify that, because right now we're only accepting IRB approved content. And I am doubting out loud whether or not IRB approved content is the best practice. So I think what the next step for us is to have somebody skilled in machine learning and natural language processing look at the content that we have and see whether or not there's anything that we can identify through that process as a potential best practice. So I think, it's an iterative process. If you have approved protocols that you're willing to share with us, we really need that. I mean, we have a lot to give to you, but we need you to give to us so that it becomes more of a crowdsourcing, crowd sharing platform that we all are helping to develop.
I'll just have one follow-up question before. Your work on educating IRBs is actually even more important. Investigators tend to be sophisticated when they come with them. IRBs are still clueless. They use the old pharmacology model. So if there is a way you can help stratify a risk based upon some, essential sentiments expressed, that would help us all enormously.
Okay. And also for those of you in here, don't think that the IRB is something that you toss your protocol over the wall and hope for the best. Get some face-to-face time with them. Let them know who you are. Let them know that you're here to help them understand this better and make it a collaboration, and you will have a better experience while we're developing more tools that you can use. And again, our next step is to develop things that IRBs can use. Yeah.
For multi-center studies, I think that the NIH has spearheaded trying to centralize that and to use Smart IRB and other tools like that. I know my own institution is increasingly comfortable letting third-party, even commercial IRBs do work to help manage and maintain oversight for the whole study at all of the sites. With that said, are there certain IRBs, at Vera, Copernicus, WRB, et cetera, that might be more savvy and experienced in some of these issues, and not that they're necessarily more permissive, but simply that they're more knowledgeable about digital and email?
We have folks from Copernicus on our advisory board. We are in, people from Veritas and Quorum are in our network. We've had people from Schulman upload protocols and institutional standards, so they're part of this community. We're really focused on digital health instead of just kind of this smart IRB is like everything, sharing everything. We're really narrow in terms of mobile health. So I think it's just, I don't think I'm answering your question, but the community is part of this. So.
But you don't sense that there's certain IRBs that maybe get it a little bit more or are more.
I think those IRBs are those that you're all working with, that you've taken the time to educate over time, and Bonnie and Angela can probably speak to this. Is all of you from Northwestern have been knee deep in this. At UCSD, they're partners, but they're not very well coordinated. So I can be working 3 doors down from somebody that's using GPS, and their study will get stuck for 8 months when it could have just been, if you could connect with that person over here, they can share what they've just done that we found acceptable. But IRBs are kind of not coordinated even in institutions. So unfortunately, IRBs vary, and there's 6,000 of them across the US. And even within an institution that has 5 of them, there's no consistency. So those that are good examples can, I was talking to Cynthia Castro Sweet from Omada Health. And I mean, that's an example of a company that's doing things above and beyond the standards because they know that they need to set an example. So and you may have IRBs that you have sailed through and you think, whoa, that was so easy. I'm good. I'm never gonna ruffle any feathers. I'm not gonna talk to them. And that's not necessarily a good thing either, because you really want them to be educated. Yes.
I have a kind of philosophical question. As technology advances and our world progresses, and you might not agree with this statement, but some people think that privacy is becoming a thing of the past. The way that we kind of traditionally conceive of it, right? Like if you Google something, your data is already being sold to someone else. If you have a smartphone, your data is being sold to so many other people. It's not private anymore. And so thinking about your example with the Fitbit user agreement, right? There's a huge issue with like technological literacy that no one reads user agreements.
Yeah.
You're giving away your data so much. And what is the responsibility of a researcher? Obviously, we should have a higher standard than private industry. But when does it get to be unhelpful or unreasonable for a researcher to be able to explain these things that, every day we give away so much data for free without understanding how it's being used?
Yeah, I think there's a public service component to this that, if you take the time to educate people as part of your consent process, you're giving this stuff away every day, but here's how we're trying to make sure you understand that and how we're doing it. That takes time, but it's an important public service component. Now, one of the things that I'm working on, and again, for funding to do this and also partnering with IEEE, is like, can we create a self-consent? Like, what are my values? And have that kind of like, I have a program in myself that I'm okay with this, and this. And then when I go to accept the terms and conditions, the artificial intelligence scans that for me in a nanosecond and says, this is not good for you because of these 3 reasons that conflict with your values. So I don't get the app, I move along, and that feedback goes back to the company. And if they get enough feedback that nobody wants your app because you do all this bad stuff with data, it's gonna take a a long time to move that, but there are ways that we can start thinking of creatively to shift that. Am I okay taking one more?
I'll take one more, so then.
Yeah, I just had a question about, so you had pointed out how the ethical implications of like, if you have an algorithm that can predict someone has Parkinson's or something, about giving that information back to people. But then I feel like there's also this push for people to have access to their own data and to like, Instagram, Facebook, you can download your own data. As a researcher, you might be publishing preliminary findings about how this specific feature is correlated or suggestive of this. How do you think we can reconcile that and navigate that?
I really am interested in this whole concept of return of information and return of value. And I think that's what you're getting at. Like, we as consumers have access to information, and there aren't a lot of checks and balances on how it's given to us, or whether that's been vetted, or do we know that's a good way to give that information to me. And a paper that we have coming out was talking about how do researchers give information to a person who, as a result of their study participation, we know is early onset Alzheimer's. And the protocol was giving that information back, which traditionally hadn't been given back to people unless that was part of qualifying them for a study. So all of us research program that I'm guessing most of you have heard about, the Precision Medicine Initiative, has this ideology and a principle: people are partners, and your information will be accessible to you. But how do we give that information to people in a way that's going to be meaningful and responsible? And we don't know the answers to this. So I think the more research you do, and the reason I got involved in the Alzheimer's is they wanted to know what were the ethical implications of giving back information that's non-actionable. It's not clinically derived, but you're pretty darn confident if you were to do it clinically, you'd get the same outcome. And then how do you track people for the next 6 weeks to make sure that they're safe? So I think these are questions that you really need to put into your research protocols to answer so that you can then inform risk assessment. Donna?
Yes, so just, Alzheimer's and these late onset diseases, that also if it's part of your genetic code, has implications for other people in your family. There's been a lot of research on right not to know.
Yes.
So people have a right not to know if they don't want to know. And also the implications, people may not understand, and researchers may not understand the implications of giving a return of information.
Yes, these are unknowns. So
Totally
we really
unknown.
need to understand more.
But it is mega bizarre that you got my data and I don't.
Right?
So it's really hard. I mean, look at, sorry, I'll be done in 1 second, but look at the loops we have to spring through in obesity research. If we do a really high grade research insulin resistance test, we can't give that data because it's not clinically approved. So we have to pay for the extra clinical one to give it to people, but then we also have to interpret it for them. And then we also have to give them an opportunity to go somewhere. So it's really a fraught field, sorry.
So we have a paper that's going to be out this month, I think, in the American Journal of Bioethics, Empirical Bioethics, on return of information. And the feasibility and usefulness are two key components that we need to figure out. So this is the beginning of an area of research that if all of you started asking some questions, we'd really make some important advances.
Camille, thank you very much.